Hello, everybody. Welcome to Every Day is Saturday. I'm Matt Stahl here with my partner, Brad Gatto. And hello, Brad.
And hello, Matt.
Oh, very proper. Love it. We've started a small little mini series where we're tackling some long-held beliefs or
myths maybe
that we would like to address.
Yeah, a couple episodes ago, we knocked out the 401k. Should you always be maxing out your 401k? Today, we're going to try to tackle debt.
Yes. And specifically the statement that all debt is bad. And
dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
I mean, what are the odds that if you start a statement with always or never, that anything that you say after that is
it's going to be any sort of controversy, or create any sort of controversy at all, right? Yeah. Always leave the door open.
Easy to find myths words like always and never are involved.
Dave Ramsey, probably have heard the name. He's a financial expert. He's out there. Has some, really good things to say. He actually made the statement earlier this year, and specifically, I want to pull up the statement here, was
debt always equals risk,
and it's
always dumb.
And we don't agree with that. So we're going to dig into that today and why we feel that we disagree with that statement. We don't think that debt is always bad. Before we do that, Brad, what have you been up to?
Life.
Love it.
If you've listened to the podcast for any period of time or you're involved with fiat in any meaningful way, you probably know that I graduated college back in May at 41 years old after taking one more class that I was missing for 17, 18 years. And I'm starting school again, man. I took the summer off. I got it coming back.
What are you taking now?
My certified financial planner classes.
Nice.
So that I can have that designation.
Love it.
So
like real life. You're
September 12th.
You're a lifelong learner.
I'm Van Wilder, basically. Not really. That's not true. How about you?
Life. I mean, great summer. The fall is kind of sneaking up on us. We have a lot of home projects going on. We always have ever since.
I was like, the home projects for you are like soccer.
Yes. Yeah. When we moved into this house, you need a lot of work. We had a vision for it. That vision's coming true, which is kind of fun to see. But in the meantime, I think we're close.
As this podcast is getting recorded, the Great Minnesota Get Together is currently going on. Oh, yeah. Is your family fairgoers?
We are not.
Ever?
We've gone before. We went on like a Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. to avoid the crowds. You know what I'm going to do though? I'm going to take some of my kids to Valley Fair while everyone else is at the fair.
A different fair,
which is an amusement park.
Not one in not the one in St. Paul, the one in the Valley.
Yeah. So my thought was
also known as Shakopee, Minnesota.
Everyone else is going to be at the Minnesota State Fair, so Valley Fair, the amusement park, will be empty.
Let's see if that holds true. I'm curious to follow up on that and see if your theory is actually correct.
We'll see if it works out. Right. I love amusement parks. Don't love huge crowds. So
those
how about you?
Usually go together. We normally go one day a year.
Yeah.
But last year, we just didn't work out last year. So actually, last year, I think was the first year I didn't go to the fair since I moved to the state of Minnesota. But it's fun for me until it's not.
I enjoy it.
Usually the switch gets flipped like immediately. I'm like there. I'm like, this is awesome. I was like, wait a second. 4 seconds later, I'm like, this is terrible. We got to get out of here.
We both grew up in the great state of Iowa, and Iowa also has a very well-known state fair.
Yes.
And so that was an annual tradition for us. So I do enjoy it.
When you lived close to it, I lived in a corner of Iowa and the fair's in the middle of the state. So that was not a thing for us growing up, driving 3 hours to get to the state fair.
Yeah.
But you were close. So that makes sense.
We're close.
Let's talk about some debt.
Yeah. So we think that as we oversee this, as we said, we disagree with that statement.
When you agreed before we started to share with all the listeners all the debt you have.
Yes. So are you ready? So American Express.
Yeah. So obviously a lot of people know who Dave Ramsey is, and this isn't us in any way, shape, or form slandering Dave Ramsey. But anytime you come out and make a declarative statement like that, there's going to be people on the other side. Mm-hmm. Inevitably. Debt is always equals risk, and it's always dumb. So part of that statement we agree with. It's the first part. It does always equal risk. Mm-hmm. There's, of course, going to be risk embedded anytime you choose to take out debt. Where we differ is that risk is always dumb. And so we want to bring up just a couple of points of where we might disagree and then talk about the difference between what we deem good debt and bad debt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we decided that we think about this kind of under two different headings. One side is leverage, one side is opportunity. So
there you go.
Let's talk about the leverage side. And I want to tee this up by actually sharing a story that was shared with me from a real life scenario. And I think this will set the stage for thinking about leverage. So I met somebody that had saved up a pile of money. They owned a townhome, and at a certain point, which happened to be, pre-2008 and 2009, they made the choice to take all of their liquid assets and to pay off their townhome that they were living in, which, if you just look on the surface level, well, they're debt free now.
So they paid off their mortgage. They just decided it was better for me to not have all this cash. It was better for me to take all my cash and then pay off the mortgage and not have a mortgage.
Yes. And what happened shortly after was the value of that particular townhome dropped by about 50%. And they happened to run into some job issues. And if you take yourself back to 2008 and 2009, you can see how that would be the case. They lost all leverage that they had altogether.
Yeah.
Had they not done that, they would have been able to continue to pay their mortgage, had a pile of money to draw from, but they put themselves in a position where they no longer had any leverage. They couldn't borrow against the value of the home because it's not there. So that's just a small illustration when we think about leverage. But there's several other ways that you can think about this.
I'll add to that and say, from a leverage perspective, take right now. So you gave an example of 0809, which really wasn't that long ago, but now you look at today, and right now in cash, just in a money market account, you can earn 5%. Whereas 2 years ago, you could get a mortgage at less than 3%.
Right.
And the true cost of a mortgage, just to break this down very quickly, doesn't actually cost 3% if that's what you're paying, because you get to write off some of that interest. And so some of that interest is going to net back to you. So the 3 goes down to something less than 3. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's 2.5. Okay. So now you're net paying 2.5 after that tax break. Then you have to factor in inflation, because you borrowed the money at today's dollar value and you pay it back at tomorrow's dollar value, which is of course worth less, as we all know, because of inflation. And so when you factor in the true cost of carrying that debt, you have to take inflation out of it, because you pay it back with money that's worth less than you borrowed. And so when you think about the true cost to carry a mortgage after the tax write-off and after inflation, if I paid 3%, it's likely after those two things, my true net cost to carry that is close to 0.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that wasn't the case, which it is, but even if it wasn't, take today. If I could still get a mortgage at 3% and my cash is earning 5, why would I give you my money that's earning 5 versus paying you 3% to borrow yours and use your money and keep mine? Because then net, I'm still winning there. So is there still risk involved? Like we said before, we agree with Dave Ramsey that of course there's going to be risk there. But as the dollars look, right now, like myself, for somebody, I took out a mortgage a couple of years ago when we moved, 3 years ago to be exact. As of today, I look like a genius because of that leverage that can be created.
You do look like a genius.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's because I have a college degree. Oh boy.
Take it one step further. Pretend that I have ambition to get into real estate investing and I have a pile of cash. Say it's $500,000 just sitting around. I can either choose to go purchase one property that costs $500,000, or I can choose to go purchase 5 properties and put 20% down on each of those and use an acronym that I've always used is OPM, using other people's money. And that's not, yes, you're going to pay the money back, but in the meantime, I'm going to go borrow the remainder of it from a bank. So I'm using leverage to actually create a larger network. And if I'm cash flowing those properties, I wouldn't be able to do that as much if I just bought one single property.
Sure.
Makes sense?
Yeah. So opportunity and leverage. So we've talked about the leverage side of it here on a couple of examples. The opportunity, it's kind of intertwined, right? Because like the example you just gave of buying investment properties, that could be an opportunity type situation. But another opportunity could be, I'm 18 and I want to further my education. And I want to go to college and I can't afford to pay for this college out of my pocket. So I'm going to take on some debt for the opportunity of getting a degree that can then further my career.
Yeah. And as we talked about before, I think that anything can be a slippery slope. If I start going on that path and it's like, well, I'm going to go hire the best coach out there and I'm going to go hire this and that. Yeah. Yes, we can take that too far. But to a degree, if we're choosing not to further develop ourselves or our education and giving up on other opportunities just because we believe that all debt is bad, I think it limits us. Okay. So let's think about what would we consider good debt versus bad debt?
Well, just to be very straight to the point, good debt could be a mortgage for a home to live in. It could be student loans to further your education, like we talked about. And I think another really good example is business debt to
Absolutely.
either start a business or further a business that you've already started in the past or own.
Yeah. Or like a payday loan. I'd say that's probably good debt.
Credit cards, great debt.
Yeah.
No, I think those are the best examples. The other, whether it is credit card debt, revolving debt, auto loans, because typically in most cases, especially newer vehicles, are going down in value. Not talking about, investing in like antique vehicles or things like that, but taking out auto loans because it's a depreciating asset. And then any sort of like revolving debt or payday type debt is typically not. When you look back to Dave Ramsey's quote of it always involves risk, the amount of risk you're taking in those situations usually far outpaces the reward.
Yeah.
Any potential reward.
So I have a scenario to run by you, and I want to get your opinion on what you think here. So would you consider credit card debt a bad debt if I was using it to start a business?
Well, that's a loaded question. And of course, it's going to depend on what that credit card debt looks like and your ability in that to pay that debt off. I mean, that's always part of that equation is if I take out 20 grand off of a credit card to invest in this business, and I know that the rate I'm going to pay that credit card is 20%, and you've got a very solid business plan and there's not a lot of risk of this business actually not working rather, then you could make the argument, sure, that could work out for you. But again, it goes back to the whole risk reward thing. In fact, I was going to wait until the very end, but this seems like a really good time to kind of bring in the logical fallacy in that statement that Ramsey made of that because it involves risk, it's always dumb. I mean, everything in life, Dave Ramsey would never tell you not to put all your money or to put any money in the stock market, that 100% of it should just be into a bank account. But yet that is the same thing. It's a risk reward proposition. There's risk embedded in that. You could make the argument there's risk in a bank account.
Right.
I think Dave Ramsey's married. Tell me that's not a risk. Getting into any sort of relationship with anybody in a meaningful way and kind of, giving yourself to other people is always a risk that's not going to come back. So
for sure,
I don't necessarily, it's a logical fallacy. So it always comes down to that calculated risk that you choose to take and making sure that if that risk doesn't pay off, that you are still solvent financially.
Right.
And so in your example of credit card debt to start a business, the answer is not always no. But because it's such a large risk, typically the answer is probably usually no, with some exception.
Yeah.
Don't sound so surprised. Wow. Yes, that was way better than I thought.
It's not like I was grading your response, but it was It was a well.
There's always that like fine line of like, oh yeah, like compliments, but then to the compliments like way too surprised, it becomes like a put down again.
Jeez. Well, it goes back to any statement that begins with always or never. You have to be really leery of anything that comes after that. So.
Yeah. You brought the business example, a home. I don't necessarily agree with this whole idea of always have to own a home or what have you. In fact, I think another really good episode for us to do down the line would be the idea of owning versus renting in retirement specifically and what that can look like. But student loans, like these days, it just is becoming next to impossible for an 18-year-old coming out of high school to go into college and not have to take out some sort of debt, unless, of course, their parents are very well-to-do and can help them pay for it. But for them to self-fund, if their parents are not in a position to do that for them or some other family member, is next to impossible.
Right.
And so then it begs the question, well, does the risk of taking on that debt match the reward?
Yeah.
And it's impossible to know until things play out, right? Hindsight's always 20/20. And anytime we take risks, it's not a risk if we knew the outcome by definition. And so anytime we take that risk, you need to be pretty calculated about it. But I don't think we should avoid debt at all costs by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. It's what's the underlying thing that we're purchasing, right? So to just rule it out altogether, I think is going to limit opportunities. But it is taking it two steps further and saying, okay, what are we purchasing and what are we expecting out of that? Am I going to buy a meal from Taco Bell or a speedboat?
I would sure hope nobody has ever taken out some sort of like structured debt other than just borrowing $5 from a friend, which is not what we're talking about here, to buy Taco Bell. But at the end of the day, there is definitely some science to this. There's a lot of what we've talked about is artwork. But when you think about partnering with a financial advisor and having questions to a financial advisor, is this the type of conversation you could or should be having with your advisor? Of course it is. And we want to be able to have these conversations with the families that we work with as well. The example that's why I said I think we should do an episode on this is, should I own my home in retirement or should I sell it and should I rent? Because that's a risk reward proposition as well. Putting money into a business, anything like that, even grandma, grandpa, or parents putting money into their kids' education and what that looks like. These are all wonderful questions and are going to be very personalized answers. But I guess here at Fiat, what we're saying is it's not always dumb, but it's not always good either.
Right. Do you have any statements you're comfortable saying always or never right now?
I will always be imperfect.
Oh, there you go. At least you didn't say I'll never be.
Well, same thing, right? I will always be imperfect or I will never be perfect.
Well, you didn't say, I would have been concerned if you would say I'll never be imperfect.
Okay. Do you have one?
No, you took mine.
No, come on. What a cop-out answer. I think we nailed it there. We're going to bring you that episode. I got to write that down. We're going to bring you the rent versus owning in retirement and the pros and cons of that.
Like that one.
That said, thanks for joining us for this episode of Every Day is Saturday, debunking the myth that debt is always bad, or to use Mr. Ramsey's word, dumb. That said, if you want more information on Fiat, you can find all of that information at our website, fiatwm.com, fiatwm.com. We're huge on education. And so not only is there going to be opportunity to subscribe to our podcast on the website, there's blogs there, there's opportunities to join group educational workshops that we do over Zoom and other things. So please check out the website. Please subscribe to the podcast. Tell your family, tell your friends, and we'll see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.